Hello, my name is Christy Rice, and I use the word friends a lot, so I hope I can call you friend. I am so obsessed with watercolor that I started designing art supplies, and that's why you're here. I teach watercolor in a very different way. I teach watercolor that is joy-driven, that creates free-spirited painters. Maybe you've never touched paint before in your life or held a brush. Or maybe it's been a long time since you've tried watercolor. Either way, you are absolutely 100% in the right place. Today, I'm gonna take you through a bunch of exercises or warm-ups. They're super fun, don't worry. And I'm gonna be there with you the entire time. And then we're gonna do a few projects as well that you can try today if you're feeling it, or you can come back to again and again. So here's the thing, I want you to stick with me today, even if it feels weird and uncomfortable, because it's a new thing, so it's probably gonna feel a little weird. But I promise you, on the other end of a little bit of weird is all that unshakable joy that's just waiting for you. I do promise this, you may not walk away with a painting you're super excited about, but you will walk away feeling energized. You will walk away feeling like you took a big, deep breath, refreshed. And I'm going to bet that you will walk away thinking about the next time you can sit down with your paints, your brushes, and some watercolor paper. Time to go over supplies and a few tricks for unpacking your new brush set. Today I'm going to be using a variety of papers. I'm going to be using this Stonehenge cold press, which means textured watercolor paper, my double weld collapsible painter's pot, my Art for Joy's Sake watercolor palette. Spray that bad boy down really well before you get started and let it kind of sit for about 30 seconds or so. Now, when you go ahead and open up your pouch, pull out your brushes, they're all attached to this card. I'll be honest, keep the card because it's got a lot of good info on it, but you're gonna wanna pull those brushes off. You're probably not gonna wanna try to put those back on again. It's not gonna be the easiest thing to do. But like I said, lots of cool info in there. So you'll get those brushes out of the pouch and you're gonna notice those plastic sleeves. Just pop those off, friends. And if they feel a little snug, you might wanna just snip a little bit with a pair of scissors. Tiny scissors are better to kind of loosen that up a bit. Those are on there for protection. You're going to notice your brushes are stiff. They are laced with a little bit of like a cornstarch to keep the bristles together during transit. We have those caps on them as well, but we like to be super duper careful in keeping everything beautifully intact. So you just want to go ahead and rinse them in clean water, dry them off with a paper towel like I'm doing here, and they are going to be ready to go. So don't be startled because they are really stiff right out of the pouch. I'm also going to be using this more affordable, or dare I say cheap paper. I actually got this from Five Below. So friends, the point is I want you to know that use what you have here. Don't feel like you have to match up your paper with my paper and go out and buy something special. Use what you have. This paper here, it's not 100% cotton. It's not the best of the best. I do believe it has some cotton in it and it works pretty well. But yeah, use what you have, use what you love. And let's get on to those warm-ups. We are ready for this. I mean, I'm ready for this. Are you ready for this? First up, we're going to create what I call a brushstroke pattern. And this is how it works. You're going to make sure that palette is sprayed down, whichever palette you're using, and you're going to grab the first color that your eye is drawn to with the first brush you're most excited to use from the Free From Fear brush collection. And you're going to make a stroke. And then you're gonna repeat that stroke all over the page evenly. Let me show you what this is gonna look like. Now I'm drawn to that fluorescent yellow, and I'm also having a love affair with my 3/4 inch dagger brush. And as you can see, I'm just taking that loaded brush with my favorite color, and I am creating the same type of brush stroke, albeit at different angles across the entire page, kind of evenly spaced. Just think that, okay, I'm creating a pattern. I'm gonna do this with different brushes, different colors, and I'm gonna fill the page. So you want things kind of evenly dispersed, but don't get super persnickety about making everything even and perfect. I'm going in order here, friends. Next, I have the number 12 round, and I'm choosing that buff color from my palette, and I am loading in between pretty much just to make sure I have the same amount of color on my brush each time. Next up, my filbert brush with that beautiful blush pink. And I'm getting to the point now where I'm starting to really kind of overlap or intersect these strokes with one another. Go ahead and do that. This is a fun way to see how the colors start to interact with one another. And so yeah, just really start letting yourself go. Remember, this is a warm-up. This is an exercise. I do believe you're going to end up with a piece of art, actual art that you're really excited about. But I don't want you thinking about that right now. This is just you, the brush, the paper, and getting things kind of loosened up. All right, fast forwarding here, I went in with the red. Now I'm going in with a really dark green and that detail brush, and I'm intersecting that with the red. And now as I'm getting into the painting, a lot more of the surface of my paper is damp or wet. You can really start having fun now. So you might be thinking like, Christy, what is the point of this besides loosening up? Well, let me tell you what, this is a fantastic way to get yourself acquainted with a new set of brushes. You've got 6 new brushes here. And yes, if you have my original brush set, you have a familiarity with, let's say, the daggers, right? But these are still new sizes. They're gonna feel different in your hand. This is a great way for you and the brushes to like kind of say hello to each other and start to become friends. All right, I just wrapped up with that 3/4 inch dagger again in that beautiful like olivey yellowy green. And now I'm going back to my filbert and doing some green squiggles, and the page is really filling up now. Now I'm definitely feeling like the color scheme is a little like 70s Christmas right now. So it's time to jazz it up with some pinks and purples and blues. Keep in mind too that you might want to be experimenting with the amount of water on your brush. You'll notice that some of my brush strokes are much more dry even as they first hit the page, and some of the other brush strokes are filled with color. Like my pink brush strokes here are definitely more juicy. They've got more water coming from the brush, more pigment, more water, more everything. And so it gives me a sense of how much these brushes can handle and how quickly I might need to reload. And that information is super helpful and valuable when you start to create some actual like floral or landscape paintings or fruit. I mean, I may or may not be giving you some teasers into what's to come, so stick with me. All right, we got some purple in there. Now things are really starting to liven up. I love how the purples and the greens are blending together. And then we're getting the blues in here. So fun. Friends, I hope you enjoyed this first warm up. It actually is pretty exciting because you have a page full of gorgeous pattern that you created quickly. And yeah, you are so ready for our next little warm up. Friends, I do have a YouTube channel absolutely brimming with more videos. I have been using this particular brush set on videos for the past 2 months. So there is even more for you to play around with. If you're loving these brushes and you zip through this video and you're feeling like you're hungry for more content, I'm gonna go ahead and put a QR code up on the screen here if you wanna scan that, or just take a look on the back of your brush card from your set and get on over to my YouTube channel and let's paint together some more. Okay, now if you want a little bit more brush action, meaning warm up, specifically a little bit more focused with each brush, this is what I recommend, friends. Grab each brush, grab a color that you love, and just load up that brush. And I want you to fill a page of watercolor paper. Now, I would suggest not making the page too big unless you have super awesome attention span, but that's not me. So I'm using about a 6 by 9 inch piece of watercolor paper, and I am filling up that paper with as many different types of strokes, but from one brush. Let's take a look at this. So we've got a page full of 3/4 inch dagger strokes. Then we've got a page full of the number 12 round strokes, and so on and so on and so on. This is a great way to really get laser focused on each individual brush. And honestly, just like the last warm up or exercise, whatever you want to call it, you're going to end up with a page full of fun. And this page could later on be cut up and used for bookmarks. It's not just an exercise. It could actually be something that you use down the road. You could frame a piece of it and write a note on the back of it and send it to someone. So I really love these drills because they're really good for your hand-eye coordination, for your muscle memory, and getting your hand accustomed to holding a brush in a particular way and changing angles. But they're also really fun afterwards for you to share with others that you love and that you want to share your art with. A couple of things to think about as you are warming up or doing this brush stroke exercise with each of your brushes. Number one, I want you to think about how much water versus paint is on your brush and kind of play with that as you fill the page. So for example, what does the brush stroke look like when you have 60% paint, 40% water, or 50-50, or 30-70? And yeah, you get what I mean. Number two, I want you to think about pressure. How much pressure are you applying to that brush when you're making the stroke? Number three, I want you to think about changing your pressure within the same stroke. Here's what I mean. Creating a stroke where you press and lift and press and lift, but in one continuous stroke. And how does that give you kind of new effects? And how could you use those effects down the road in a quote unquote real painting? Number four, is your paper to start with dry, wet, or damp? And you could even section out your page and have a wet section and a damp section and a dry section, and try each of the brush strokes in each of those sections. Okay, moving on to the next exercise project, warm up, whatever you want to call it. We're going to tackle some watercolor fruit, and friends, it's going to be super loose, not realistic, just free-spirited and fun. Let's get into it. We're going to start with our number 12 round and load that up with an orange. Whatever orange you got, mix red and yellow. You know how we roll here. Use the colors you have, use what you love. All right, we're gonna be using the tip of this brush. It's gonna be a wet brush on a dry page, friends, and we're gonna make a circle, an outlined circle with your orange paint. Let's do this. Now, the thing to know is that this circle is not going to be continuous. I sometimes like to start with a little dot in the middle. This is going to be a slice of an orange, kind of top-down view, and see how that circle is not continuous. Then take the broad edge of your brush and make some really lazy, soft-edged triangles that are kind of emanating out from that dot in the middle. Now, I just grabbed a little more yellow on my brush, and I'm kind of completing the circle. Now, let's switch up to that cat's tongue brush. We're gonna load that up and add a little bit more detail to those lazy triangles around and in between. Again, this is super loose, super washy, super free-spirited, but this darker orange mix a little bit of red with yellow, peach if you have it, anything to make an orange a little bit darker. You could mix in a little brown to your orange, but I'd go with a little bit of red. That'll just keep things nice and juicy and bright and bold. Now, we're going to create a peeled slice of an orange, and that's just gonna be the shape of a moon. I started with a little red that was already on my brush. This is still wet on dry. Your paper's dry, your brush is wet. Go into the filbert, and I'm gonna add some dabs of just another orange that I have on my palette. This is just to give a little bit of textural interest. A few dabs of yellow. Again, just a little interest. Filbert brush again, your perpendicular hold, and you're creating a continuous circle, but it's not a perfect circle, right? It's almost like a little bit of an oval. Then you're gonna go ahead with that 3/4 inch dagger and fill that in with yellow and just let the outline color kind of blend and wash into the outline of that yellow. And then a few dabs of your darker orange around the edge and in the middle. I'm gonna go right underneath that first cross section of the orange and create another kind of lopsided ovally circle, and it's definitely coming from behind that first orange slice, so you're not seeing the entire view, and a little bit of red in the middle, and that's kind of like the navel of the orange. Whenever you're putting that dot in the middle of a full unpeeled orange, that's your navel. All right, going in with my 1/8 inch dagger, that's the blue handle, friends, and adding a few dots of a darker orange. I would suggest having a few different oranges mixed up on your palette ahead of time. If the whole color mixing thing makes you nervous, that will certainly keep your kind of stress level very low during this little exercise. I grabbed a little bit of brown on a dirty brush, I didn't rinse, and accented those navels all around. And I even put a few dabs up there in that peeled orange slice. Back to the full red, and I'm going to further kind of edit and refine the outer edge of that second unpeeled orange. And then I'm gonna go ahead and start to add some kumquats. I just see kumquats as little mini baby oranges that are like orange grapes. They're kind of like in the shape of a grape, a large grape, but they're an orange, right? So I love adding them to florals, and I love adding them to citrus paintings because they're like a mid-sized element that keep your composition interesting. All right, going in with that cat's tongue from your set and making a few ovals. That's a perpendicular hold to the paper. And notice my hand is far down on that ferrule. Your ferrule is the metal part of the brush. I've got lots of control by holding it that far down. And then go in with a little bit of yellow added to a dirty brush. I didn't rinse in between the orange and the yellow, and just fill in those little kumquats. Some are going to kind of be bumping up next to one another. Some are going to be on top of one another. Add a little brown to that dirty brush, and using just the tip, add a few little stems, and then press, drag, and lift with that greenish brown. It wasn't just brown before for those stems. There was a little green on there. Press, drag, and lift to create my classic approach to leaves. And I did a lot of this earlier in the brush drills. Friends, there is another video you can have a look at. I am going to link it below. Actually, it's a playlist all about paintbrush drills, and I think it's really going to help you out here. And so take a look at that when you have a moment. Back to the 1/8 inch dagger, press and lift on either side of a single line, and you've got a little fern. I'm doing it again here. Press and lift, press and lift, press and lift, and I'm getting smaller as I go to the point. And there you have a little tiny fern. Put a little stem on the end, you're good to go. The point here, friends, is to work quickly. Don't overthink what you're doing. That's again why I think it might be a good idea for you to have some colors pre-mixed. I'm going back to that 3/4 inch dagger, press and lift. Very little drag here, friends. Press and lift, press and lift, press and lift. And when you go ahead and check out that playlist for leaf making, one of the videos in there is all about this press, drag, and lift technique. It is just like it sounds. You press, you drag, and you slowly and gradually lift to create the quintessential leaf. Now I'm just doing a press and lift with light pressure with the curved edge of this 3/4 inch dagger to create some connecting stem branchy-like moments in this painting. Whew, how are we feeling? I hope you're feeling good. Go ahead and get your comments going below, friends. This is a private video just for brush owners, but I still see the comments. And if you have questions, I want to know about it. Go ahead and grab that orangey yellow brush. That is your 000 detail brush. Load up one of your darker oranges, and you're going to just create some thin detail lines following those kind of like pie shapes now that are showing themselves to you. This cross section of the orange is really like a pie that's been sliced into like 8 slices, right? Just add some thin details, and then I'm popping into that orange below it and adding some dots for texture and interest, going back into that navel for even more contrast and detail. This little baby brush is going to be your BFF going into the kumquats, adding a little navel to the kumquats, and this will start to give this loose watercolor painting a little bit more structure and depth and drama. You don't want to overdo it on these details. I mean, you can if you want. That could be fun. You could get something out of that. That's a great exercise. But my goal here for you is to just be loose and free and not get all tangled up in the worry of how to, what if, what should I do? How can I do this next? Am I mixing the right color? And all of that garbage. I just want you to just free flow it, right? Don't think too much. And sometimes when we get into too much detail, it means we're thinking too much. Right, I'm using that same 000 detail brush, and I'm adding some darker green details to the leaves right down the middle and some veins as I go. Just mix whatever green you have. You could do a little bit of brown in there. You could do a little blue in there, even a little purple, and that's going to be a nice dark green. Now, filbert brush. I rinsed it lightly. There's still some color on there, just a little, and I'm adding some just diffused marks in the background. They're almost colorless, and then loaded up with a little bit of blue from my palette, and I'm doing a few press and lifts with varying pressure at different angles, and I'm getting this interesting kind of like filler flower vibe. I almost want to turn these into white little orange blossoms, and I think that's what I'm going to do. And see how it's happening right before your eyes, that those colorless marks, became the white as soon as I put those blue leafy marks down next to them, and especially when I added a little bit of yellow in the center of that colorless flower. Just make sure that those colorless strokes that you added down first are dry before you add the yellow, or you could have a little mess on your hands. Now, back to the 1/8 inch dagger, a few press and lifts at varying pressure and angles in pink. I want you to get those in about 3 places throughout your composition. Odd numbers are your friend when it comes to composition. Now, as those pink moments dry, I want you to go ahead and mix up a slightly kind of medium gray. You want it to be slightly darker than that like colorless flower you added earlier, so that we can go in and add a few little linear details to that quote unquote white flower. So like a soft gray, a soft blue, and just make sure that those areas are dry before adding this. Friends, if you're curious about all these techniques, wet on dry, linear detail, all of that, I'm gonna link my Watercolor Mastermind below. It's gonna give you all that you need to know about the basics of watercolor, but free-spirited Christy style. Okay, going back into those pink little dots, and we're gonna add some little brown accents. They're not perfectly dry, but it's okay. A little bit of brown in there at the base of each of those dots, and we're starting to build some interesting loose watercolor filler. At this point, I'm just starting to add some darker orange, which is like my red mixed with a little bit of fluorescent yellow, a little bit of brown, and I'm adding like a second layer to the oranges, to the kumquats, but just in select areas, so it just looks like a shadow instead of all over color. Notice on those kumquats, just kind of one stroke down, one side. On that orange there on the right bottom corner, just a little bit on the top left of that orange, a little bit into the pie slices of the cross section cut orange. Just want to add that last touch of loose watercolor shadow and drama. Friends, if you're still feeling like a little tentative, if you feel like maybe your first attempt at this was a little messy and you're not super excited about it, but you're still really motivated, go ahead and give it a second try. It's a fantastic way to build up muscle memory, to actually try something for a second time right after you've tried it for the first time. Just get a whole new sheet of paper and have at it. And maybe try to even work a little quicker on your second time around. You'll be shocked sometimes at the results you'll get when you do it the second time, but quicker. Now I've gone back in with my 1/8 inch dagger here, and blue, I'm going in wet on dry and just sketching in some very simple teardrop style leaves. Except the one edge of the teardrop, the one end isn't curved, they're both pointed. And that's your basic sketchy leaf. All right, friends, let me know how you feel about this in comments. Do you feel like you didn't breathe through the whole thing? What questions do you have? I want to hear all about it. Okay, so we've done our brush drills, friends, hopefully. And let me tell you what, you could spend a week just messing around with glorious brush drills. There's so much fun you could have there. Then we moved on to our brush stroke pattern, and that is another exercise. That is another go-to. If you're feeling, I don't know what to paint, but I sure know I want to paint, that brush stroke pattern will never fail you. That's one you can go to again and again and again. And our orange warm-up, that was a way for us to kind of get a little bit more representational or realistic, if you will, compared to what we were doing before that. And now, friends, we're gonna hop into a landscape. Don't be nervous. I actually think this landscape will feel easier than the oranges. Trust me. All right, friends, I am bringing in a third paper I didn't mention earlier. And if there ever was a time to paint on the good stuff, it's with these kind of landscapes. I'm gonna be doing, this is definitely more in the realistic realm than the oranges, but still not realistic. This is kind of that classic approach to landscapes, high contrast. We see a lot of them out there over the last few years. One of my creative, I don't know, I call her like my creative kindred spirit. Kolbie Bloom does these type of landscapes. I have an amazing series with her that we did late last year. I'm going to link it below. Definitely worth checking out if you're new to this creative journey and feeling a lot of anxiety or stress or fear. You got to check that one out. Okay, so I'm using Arches cold press. It's like 140 pound is basically what it equates to. So it's nice and thick. It's got a nice texture. Arch's cold press is known for having a little bit more texture than, say, the Stonehenge cold press that I was using earlier for the brushstroke pattern. You could use Academy. Anything that is 100% cotton watercolor paper is going to be really, really helpful for this type of painting. Starting off with the 3/4 inch dagger, wet on dry, I have mixed up a really soft yellow, and I'm just going back and forth horizontally, letting my paint run out. I've started just below center from top to bottom, and this is kind of an idea where my horizon line is going to be. So that soft yellow, and notice how I'm creating those strokes. I'm going back and forth, a little bit of a curve using the curved edge of that paintbrush. Now, rinsing my brush, and I'm gonna go ahead and wet that top, like, let's call it 2/3, okay, of the paper, that white space above the yellow. And then I'm gonna go in with just a little bit of blue on my damp, clean brush, and I'm gonna, again, stroke back and forth and just get some color in there. Now I'm going a little heavier, and you'll see me using upstrokes, just little taps, little swooshes, little swirls, and I'm just kind of making little loopy marks with, again, the curved edge of the 3/4 inch dagger. Now this is going into a damp page because I just dampened that page with clean-ish water. You can already start to see the clouds forming, adding a little purple here in the upper left-hand corner, adding even a little bit of brown into that purple because that's going to really darken and make this kind of a moody, thundery, lightning almost happening kind of sky, and that's what I'm after. If you are not seeing those soft diffusing kind of things happen between the various colors and strokes that you're adding, your paper just needs a quick spritz. You can spritz it down over top of your color. You just didn't have it wet enough. All right, and I'm just continuing on with little taps, little swooshes, little scrubs of the brush back and forth, but I'm always kind of at a 30-degree angle, and I'm always using the curved edge of that 3/4 inch dagger. Now, head in with a clean paper towel and start to do some blotting, and this is what's going to make your clouds reveal themselves. Some blotting, right? And that is it, friends. You don't want to like work too much into the sky. You don't want to overwork this sky. And when you start to blot, you're going to see those clouds come to life, but just kind of like blot and get out of there. Don't overwork it, friends, okay? If the blotting isn't working for you, you might not be using 100% cotton paper. You're not going to see as white of a white when you blot a non-100% cotton paper. Going down into the foreground here, the bottom like quarter of the page, a little bit of water, and then I'm using the number 12 round brush with really intense blue. Notice I'm holding my brush halfway up the handle, and then I'm going back and forth horizontally. Just keep that brush moving. Long strokes, short strokes, a little bit more pressure here and there. Just let that brush dance. I mentioned Kolbie Bloom. She taught me that. If I learned anything in the last year, it was to just not feel like you always need to know what your brush is going to do next. Just keep it moving softly, consistently, and see what happens. All right, I'm rinsing my brush, heading up into that kind of top third, just below the sky. Add a little bit of peach there. If you don't have peach, just water down some orange. And I just kind of want it to be like a hazy, kind of dusky sky. And then a little bit of blotting right away. Going in with the filbert brush. My sky is still damp, friends. So I'm tapping in some really intense dark blue into and around some of those blotted clouds that I did earlier. When you're dabbing, you're thinking about what you're not dabbing, and that's going to kind of become your clouds. Whatever you're not applying paint to at this point is going to be lighter, and it's going to be the puffy fluffiness of your light clouds. Now I'm continuing that over here on the right side. My paint isn't as intense. I'm definitely reserving that really dark, moody sky for the upper left corner. And notice how I'm going around those areas that I had blotted earlier, and that is making them pop even more. At this stage, your page, it's all still damp, so if you add a little bit too much color in an area, you can easily blot it up. Grabbing some purple, friends, and heading back into that foreground, which is water, so for waterground, and going back and forth horizontally, little kind of curved, swishy, wave-like marks that look like ripples. Some are dabs. I'm letting that paint run out too. Look at that. On the left-hand side there, let that paint run out. Look, it creates gorgeous texture. Reloaded ever so slightly, and I'm going up into where the water there meets that yellow stuff that I added at the very beginning of the painting. But the paint application here is not heavy. The page is almost dry, just slightly damp. And I'm going back down into the bottom right corner here and adding some more purple. This is all with your filbert brush. You don't want straight lines. You just want kind of bouncy, curved, dabby, just loose lines that keep going and going and going. And if you feel like you want to blend out an area, you want to soften it, just make sure you rinse your brush first. How are we feeling, friends? Is this nerve-wracking? Are you feeling good so far? Let me know in comments. If you have any questions about the supplies you're using, maybe you're getting different results from your brushes compared to what I'm getting, please let me know, and I will do my best to address those questions as soon as possible. At this point, friends, we need to set this bad boy aside and let it dry completely. Because now we're going in with the richness, with the contrast, and this is the final stage. You're not going to believe this. So we're mixing up a super dark color. I'm using the 3/4 inch dagger because it's my big brush in this set. Mix brown, mix purple, mix blue, mix a little green in there. You basically want the darkest color you can get that looks the most neutral without using black. There's not even black in my palette. And then you're gonna make a stroke, kind of 3/4 of the way in from the right edge. Make a stroke and then start stroking upwards to create these kind of imperfect, interrupted, soft-edged triangles. All right, let's look at that again. Maybe slow it down a little bit even, right? You start with a stroke, make sure that brush is loaded up real heavy with that dark, rich color you mixed. And as you drag that stroke over, notice it's not going all the way across the page. It's 3/4 of the way from the right. And as you stroke over, I want you to start lifting up that 3/4 inch dagger and then coming down on that sharp edge of the brush to create a soft triangle. One's gonna be taller than the other. They're gonna be imperfect and interrupted. All right, use that same color mixture with the cat's tongue, friends, and I want you to go down into the bottom left corner and start to make some scratchy moments. And in this area, you can use blue, you can use, fully saturated purples. You don't have to just use that dark color that you mixed up. And friends, I was mistaken. I'm actually using the filbert brush. What is wrong with me? That area of the mountains is still damp. Go in there with some really saturated blue just to add some drama and depth. Even though that starting color was super dark, you can add some more love in there. You can add some more contrast in there. I always say, when the page is damp or wet, you have an opportunity. All right, now I've got the number 6 cat's tongue, friends, and I'm remixing that dark color. Brown is key there. Getting that brown in with the blues and the greens and the reds is really gonna give you that really neutral but kind of intense color. And using low hold right down there on the ferrule, the metal part, I want you to stroke upwards lightly to get a thin mark. Make sure those thin grassy marks are emanating from a point the point doesn't have to be a sharp point down in the grasses, but you don't want those grasses all coming up from separate points in that area. You want them to kind of look like they're spraying from one central point down in the ground. And then start to add little taps and dabs at the edge of some of those taller grasses to create that kind of wheat look. Friends, this is coming alive before your eyes. And how simple. Not simple in terms of like, anybody could do that. I understand there's certainly skill involved here and you have to ramp up to that. But friends, this approach to landscape feels effortless. And when you have the right tools, which you do right now, because you got these brushes and you're hopefully using 100% cotton paper or something close to it, you've got this. You've got this. You can start to go down in that bottom left corner again and add some more scratchiness. You don't want any of that area at the very bottom to be fully filled or fully dark with color. Now, I am bringing in my liner brush from the original set, which is the Art for Joy's Sake watercolor set, because I want some really, really thin, lyrical, whimsical lines. And I'm just doing that same kind of upstroke, making sure everything is kind of emanating from a central point down there on the ground, and then fanning up towards the sky. And look at this. I have not been this happy with a landscape in a very long time. And I was so excited that this went well as I was recording this for you, because I know that with these brushes, you can be really successful with this approach to landscapes as well. It's extremely, extremely satisfying. Let me know in comments, have you painted along with me? What roadblocks did you run into? Did you get frustrated in certain parts? Let me help you through it, and we can also help each other through it. Friends, the last tiny detail, which actually makes a huge impact, I'm taking that 000 brush, and I'm taking that super dark color that I mixed up earlier, just re-wetting it if it's dried on your palette. That's where a spray bottle of any kind comes in handy. And then loading that up and creating kind of asymmetrical little V's. Some are going to be larger, some are going to be smaller. Watch where I'm placing them just to get a sense of what kind of good balance is. I mean, you know, I think mine are okay. I'm not saying they're the best, but these are your little birds in the distance, shadows of little birds flying through the sky. And they really add a little something to a simple but powerful landscape like this one. We are moving on to our final painting project. And this one you gotta hunker down for. It's a loose floral. One of my favorite things to paint in the entire world. We're gonna use all the brushes, and I'm gonna walk you through every single last blessed, lovely, joyful step. Okay, enough of that, let's do this. All right, friends, here I am using arches again. This time I'm using about a 9x12, and I'm going to fill this whole space. If you're feeling a little overwhelmed, one of my biggest recommendations that I make all the time is just to paint a little smaller. So 8x10. I wouldn't recommend much smaller than that for this one, because that could actually make things more difficult for you. So nothing larger than a 9x12, nothing smaller than an 8x10. I'm using all the brushes here. Make sure your palette is sprayed down. There's not going to be any sketching here, friends. No sketching. All right, starting out with the number 12 round and that buff color, which is just like a creamy ivory, I'm going to use the side of my brush and just make some sideways strokes that are kind of scratchy and wiggly, but that are grabbing a lot of the surface area of the brush. The goal here is to create several petals. I'm going in between that buff color and that seashell pink color. If you don't have my palette and you don't have a creamy pink, just water down a red or water down a pink you have in your palette, and that'll work just fine. I'm going with the pink and creating a smaller version of that open flower I started with. Just notice here, let's kind of repeat that slow-mo. Just notice how I'm leading with the point of my brush, but I'm not staying there. I'm quickly pressing down and moving the paint around with the middle, or like the full girth of that brush. All right, friends, now you have one main flower in the middle and two that are kind of a side view, or maybe just a smaller facing view. We're gonna decide as we go. I am mixing up a green. Here's the thing, you don't have to mix. You use a green, maybe you have a green that you just love. It exists already, just use that. I'm using the 3/4 inch dagger, and I am pressed with a very long meandering drag, and I'm doing this in the shape of a V around that first flower that I painted, and then a skinny stem leading up to the right flower, a few taps for that center flower stem, and then a press, a really quick drag down, and then another press, drag with a little bit of a quiver and lift. And friends, you have your basic structure of your painting right there. We're gonna go through that again, slow motion, and really talk you through it. All right, starting back where we just have those 3 flowers in. You've got your green, press, slow, long drag. You've got the most pressure kind of 3/4 of the way down, and you've got a slow lift to get that nice thin line at the end. When I'm using my brush here for just the stems, it's a little bit of a tap and a sweep, not so much a drag with a lot of pressure. Remember, you can do upstrokes, downstrokes, or you can go sideways like I did on that leaf just now on the left-hand side. Just vary your pressure, change up your color as you go, and keep all of those leaves kind of protruding or emanating from one central location underneath all of the flowers. Okay, grab your filbert brush, friends. Load up again. I'm gonna use the peach this time, a few dabs to make kind of a awkward circle, and do that over and over again. My brush is a little dirty, it's okay. We're not gonna be precious about it. We're gonna do some kind of like hanging blossoms. I don't know the name of these. I'm kind of just making them up. Making a cluster here in the bottom right, and I'm gonna make another cluster in the top left. The cluster in the bottom right is going to be kind of sagging downwards and drooping. And the one in the top left is going to be kind of like it was just watered and it's shooting for the sky. And notice how I'm getting smaller with those little dashes or dots of color as I go out towards the end of the swag of this filler flower. Changing up my color, adding some yellow to a peach. And those first three flowers are still damp, but I'm going in the center with that peachy yellow and dabbing that in just because I feel like I want to see a little bit of yellow there. It just feels good and makes sense. I didn't get as much coverage on that leftmost flower, so I lifted up some of that buff color with a dry, clean brush and then replaced with some more yellow. Going in pink, I'm taking that yellow peachy mixture I just made and added some fuchsia to it. And on the ends of each of those peach dots or dashes, I'm adding a little touch, a little press and lift with an 1/8 inch dagger. Press and lift, let the paint run out, reload sometimes, and you're creating just a little bit of a shadow. This could be a pod. This could be a vine with some type of like blossom that's just about to burst hanging from it. You know, this is you do you land, okay? This is where you make the rules. Taking that same color, using the tip of the 1/8 inch dagger and going around the circumference of that yellow I just put down. Everything's still damp, so you're gonna get that soft diffusing of color. If you don't want that softness, if you want a crisper look, let those flowers dry before you add that pink to them. Going to my 000, and I'm just mixing a little bit of a rusty color here, rusty kind of orangey, a little bit of brown. And I accidentally got some spatter, so I'm just adding some more to make it look intentional. All right, these are my stems. Notice how the stem is drooping. Like I said, all of them are going to emanate from one spot, kind of in between those two big sweeping leaves on the right-hand side that I added earlier. They're emanating from that one spot, but they're all then eventually drooping downwards. I am holding this 000 brush just above the ferrule. That's the metal part. So I have nice control. And then I'm cinching back up. Now I'm holding it almost above the middle because I want a little less control as I add a few dots of that dark rusty color where the stem meets the top of the flower, the bud, the berry, whatever you're calling it. And I'm adding just like a little like oval there on top, and that creates a little bit more of the anatomy of the blossom, let's say. You've got the stem, you've got like a little cap, and then you've got the bloom or the bud. All right, and basically the same thing goes for this swag of the same flowers in the upper left, but we're just kind of reversing it. These are still drooping downwards, but the whole swag is kind of shooting up towards the sky. So this is some type of droopy type of filler greenery flower. But same thing goes, just pay attention to where you're holding the brush. When you're creating those long, wispy stems, you want to be holding the brush almost perpendicular to the paper, further down towards the metal ferrule. And then when you're adding those little caps where the stem meets the top of the flower, you want to be holding that brush further up towards its end. Now, don't rinse your brush, don't blot your brush. Whatever is left on there, I want you to add a little bit where the yellow and the pink were added earlier to those first three flowers. We're just trying to further define the center of those flowers. And notice, I am using the best of the best watercolor paper. It's 100% cotton. It's known in the industry to be the best. Notice how it is still damp, and we've been painting for almost 8 minutes and it's still damp. All right, adding some filler, press and lift along some of those filler flower stems that we just painted. Press and lift, kind of make sure they look like bricks laid down. You don't want them right across from one another. Maybe bricks wasn't the best analogy. That's more for rose petals, but you don't want one leaf right across from another. It's not going to look as natural. So kind of stagger. There we go. That's the word, Christy Rice. Stagger the placement of those little filler leaves here and there. Now I'm going in and adding even more of these. I'm creating kind of a longer version where when I start out, my press and lift turns into a press, short drag, and then a lift. And I'm doing that to create kind of a fern filler, very loose, very modern fern. I just finished that one up in the bottom left-hand corner. And now I'm adding a little bit of yellow to the green that was already in the mixing tray. And I'm kind of taking the same concept with a press, drag, and lift, but I'm letting the paint run out and I'm getting a much softer effect. I'm getting a little bit of dry brush going on. And notice how I'm starting to tuck in longer, like long grass, like think of like ornamental grasses that are in landscaping. They're long and sweeping and they sway in the breeze. I'm adding a little bit of that there in the upper right-hand corner there. A little bit of spatter, the way that you apply spatter, friends. And again, if you want to know more about basic techniques, spatter being one of them, check that mastermind link below. All right, adding a little blue to the green that was already in my mixing tray here, and I'm using the cat's tongue, and now I'm adding shadow to the existing big sweeping leaves. I'm just following the marks I already made, but kind of on the underside of them, I am adding a stroke of this dark blue. And that is a really simple way to add a shadow. You just want to create placement that doesn't cover the entire leaf, so you lose all of that initial lighter color you added earlier. And feel free, add a few little strokes and dashes and swoopy lines like I am here in the bottom right-hand corner to fill in the composition. Play around with that cat's tongue using the tip, going from the tip with light pressure, same stroke down to heavy pressure with the body of the brush. That goes back to those brush drills that I talked about earlier in the video. That's why they are so valuable. Now I'm using the tip of the cat's tongue and I am holding it perpendicular to the page and creating little circular berries. I'm creating the outline first and just placing them carefully throughout my composition. Compositional rules are, we worry about them, we get uptight about them, but one of the basic rules I love the most is add collections of items in odd numbers. So 3 of something, 5 of something, 7 of something is more visually pleasing to the eye. If you have more questions about composition, I am going to link a video below and it will really help you out if you feel like you're entering that stage of your journey. All right, I'm just taking some water and kind of rubbing that around inside the outlines of those berries and filling in a bit, and then taking some dark blue, green, use what you have, use what you love, use whatever color feels right, and adding that to the center of those berries, friends. And every time I have a darker color on my brush, I will carefully evaluate and say, could I use this dark color somewhere else in the composition? So I took that color from the shading on the berries, and now I'm applying it to the base or the kind of the bouquet, the collection of the leaves and the stems. This does have a kind of a bouquet feel because it's all kind of coming to a point at the bottom. And so I'm adding some detail, I'm adding some thickness with that darker color currently on my brush down there. And it's just a collection of different strokes all emanating from those central sweeping leaves that we created very early on. I had some peachy yellow on my palette, I added some pink, and now I'm doing a press and lift, very little drag with my 12 round. Press and lift, different angles. Notice how I'm creating a swag. Same idea as those peachy, droppy, kind of droopy filler flowers we added earlier. These are just shaped differently. All right, I want to let those dry, so I'm taking a little bit of brown and I'm going into another layer of shadows on those sweeping leaves that we created earlier, and I'm even adding a dot of that darker brown to the center of the flowers to really get those centers to pop even more. And again, evaluating, seeing if I can use what's left on my brush of that brown mixture to add a little bit of something throughout. See there in the bottom, Right hand side, I'm adding a few press and lifts, a few press drag and lifts just to further define the bottom of that bouquet. And all good decisions, adding some contrast here. I really approached this composition from a classic way of starting watercolor. Starting light and airy, lots of water, less paint, and gradually building up to more paint on the brush, less water, more contrast, more boldness. That's a traditional way of approaching the buildup of watercolor and paint in a composition. Now, often I break that rule, and I have lots of videos about that. You could probably close your eyes and just pick one on my channel, and you're gonna see me breaking that rule, but I did wanna mention that rule. All right, friends, bringing out that 000, and you know what time it is. I'm gonna add some stems to those pink sprays. Just remember, the key to those looking natural is to keep all of those little stems eventually kind of coming back to a central location. That is going to make them look super duper natural, like God made them. All right. I'm adding a little bit of that brown mixture that I have in my mixing tray. I'm just adding some dots of it in those original peach droopy filler flowers. And again, evaluating, do I need it anywhere else? Just added a little bit of blue to that brown. I just wanted it to be a little richer. And I'm going in, friends. My favorite thing is linear detail. That is covered in the Mastermind, friends, where I'm kind of sketching. I am doing an outline a little bit here on the original flower. She's my focal point, but it's not a continuous outline. That's really important. And that is important because you're getting a much more whimsical, kind of still natural feel versus a more cartoony, continuous, solid outline. I am using a light touch. There's not a lot of pressure here. I do have almost a perpendicular hold on that brush. So think about your brush and the paper making a T, and I'm keeping my wrist loose. I'm using more motion from my arm rather than my wrist, and that is keeping those lines light and airy and whimsical. I will say this, you might want to definitely, if you're gonna do any of those drills, do a drill, a page of drills with this brush. It's going to really loosen you up and give you a lot more of a sense of freedom as you're entering this stage of the composition. Now towards the bottom here, I'm using that dark color and I'm adding some just sketchy, simple shaped leaves. Basically a teardrop where both ends are coming to some semblance of a point. That is your basic sketchy leaf, at least in Christie land, okay? Great fillers, I just connect them, bump them up to one another. It's a great kind of break for the eye in a modern watercolor where everything else is washy and kind of ethereal. Having that kind of that contrast of a linear moment with watercolor can be really satisfying and really effective for composition and, you know, preventing the eye, your viewer's eye, from getting bored, honestly. So I know I'm going off camera a little bit here, but it'll be worth it, I promise. So like I said, friends, make sure you're at least doing that one full page of drills with this brush. It will pay off, I promise you. Another thing to keep in mind as you're adding these sketchy moments to your composition is to vary the size. Do some larger leaves that are sketched, medium-sized leaves, and then some teeny tiny leaves for sure. Adding in some more spatter. I just did a little bit more blue and brown, and I'm tapping that cat's tongue over top of another brush, and I'm getting a nice fine little spatter in a few places. Don't overdo spatter. It's so easy to overdo it. Oh my gosh, friends, I can't believe we're here. I can't believe that an hour has gone by and, well, almost an hour. But friends, here is what I want to leave you with. Being at the end of this video doesn't mean you're at the end of something. This is just the beginning. If this is the first time that you've experienced watercolor, my guess is that you're feeling super overwhelmed. And I'm not saying that to kind of like be rude. I'm saying that because it's the truth. And I don't want that feeling of overwhelm to stop you in your tracks. I want you to think about the experiences you just had with me and the paper and the paint and the brushes. And I want you to think about 2 moments. Just find 2 moments in all that you've created up until now that you felt were really exciting. And I want you to try to recreate those. Go ahead, pull out a smaller piece of paper and just recreate those 2, maybe 3 elements that you thought were successful. And that is a way to build momentum in this process. Because this process, for as many joyful moments that you have, you're going to have moments of questioning and disbelief and second guessing. It's just the nature of trying anything new, right? but I don't want you to walk away. I want you to remember and sit in those delicious moments that were exciting, that were successful, that felt good, and that brought you joy. And you might be wondering, well, like, how do I know I found joy? There had to have been a moment or two in this session where you lost track of time, where you didn't hear the doorbell ring, you didn't hear the dogs bark, you didn't hear, the dryer sound off, that it was done. That's joy. When you lose time, when you lose a sense of surrounding, when you lose a sense of what's going on around you and you're only thinking about what's on the page, even if you're frustrated at that moment, I promise you that's joy. And I want you to chase after that. And I want you to continue to come back to my channel. At the end of this, I'm going to pop up a screen so you can just have all the info you need to stay in touch with me. Ask me questions, find me on all the places, the TikTok, the Instagram, email me. I am here for you. This journey is important to you and it is important to me, and I know the power that it holds. So what I wish for you now, until we meet again, dear friend, and I'm hoping it's okay, I call you dear friend, is I wish you so much more happy painting.